Suella Braverman, great to have you here on Planet Normal.
Hello, Liam.
Why is it that you think the UK now should leave the European Convention on Human Rights? Is that what you want to hear from the Conservative leadership?
I've been wanting to hear this from the Conservative leadership for several years. I think I was one of the first sitting cabinet members or ministers of the last Conservative administration to come out publicly in favour of withdrawing from the European Convention on Human Rights back in 2022. I was received with a lot of criticism and backlash from my own colleagues at the time, but I'm very pleased that 3 years on, opinion seems to have shifted, and many of those same colleagues are now agreeing with me actually and have seen the light on this issue. That I think is absolutely essential that the Conservative Party makes an unequivocal commitment now that if it were to win the next general election, it will absolutely withdraw from the European Convention on Human Rights.
Give us some colour, Suella. What's it like to be Home Secretary when the UK is in the European Convention of Human Rights? Did you ever feel that the UK was over-interpreting the judgments from Strasbourg lawyers?
Well, the turning point for me was the flights to Rwanda that were grounded effectively by judges who were sitting in the Strasbourg court, who applied a pretty opaque and dubious process in the form of Rule 39 interim orders, and who at the last minute overruled English courts to stop those flights from taking off to Rwanda. And that was really the death knell for the Rwanda scheme. Everyone will remember that moment. People were glued to their TV screens watching as to whether the flights would take off. And one by one, the migrants were taken off the plane because they were able to secure injunctions ultimately from the Strasbourg court. And that scuppered the whole plan, and that set off a whole spiral of legal cases and appeals and counter appeals that ended in the whole scheme collapsing, really. So that the main, one of the big symptoms of our membership of the European Convention has been our inability to control our borders and stop the boats. That's one such problem. My report that I set out and published in July refers to many other policy areas where the convention has stymied the government's ability to deliver its democratic mandate.
Do you feel that the convention basically scuppered the Rwanda policy? Would you bring back the Rwanda policy now? Can you foresee Labour ever bringing back the Rwanda policy?
So I do think that it was our membership of the European Convention on Human Rights, plus the Human Rights Act, and the extensive judicial review arrangements that we have in this country that all worked to, block the Rwanda policy and ultimately defeat it. So as I set out, originally they stopped the flights from taking off. That was the first intervention really by the Strasbourg court. That was foreign judges in a foreign court applying the European Convention as they saw fit to stop a democratically elected government from entering into a legitimately negotiated arrangement with a third country, Rwanda. Following that, and through the appeals right up to the Supreme Court, the Rwanda scheme was found to be unlawful because it breached the obligations and the articles in the European Convention, and that's because of an overinterpretation of the European Convention combined with the Refugee Convention. But it's because of the fact that the real problem, and this is what I encountered as Home Secretary, was that the rights of illegal migrants, the rights of foreign paedophiles, the rights of foreign terrorists become more important under the European Convention of Human Rights than the rights of the law-abiding British majority. And so I was unable to deport foreign paedophiles, deport foreign terrorists, stop the boats, because they were able to all rely on mainly Articles 3, Articles 8, and other articles of the European Convention to stop the Home Office from deporting them.
Before we explore the convention and the mechanisms for leaving it, the implication of leaving it more fully, Suella Braverman, just tell us why it is that you think third country processing is so vital. Why do we need to process people not here in the UK?
I think it is the right model. And I think it is the right model because it's worked before. If you look at Australia, Australia largely solved their maritime migration problem. They had a problem of, as they call them, boat people illegally arriving on the shores and the beaches of Australia about a decade ago. They largely solved that problem through third-party processing, and they set up processing centres in Nauru and Papua New Guinea, and they were able to remove the illegal migrants upon their arrival on Australian territory to those places for processing and detention. That model worked because it provided the necessary deterrence, because it totally undermined the business model of the gangs and the objective that the illegal migrants and the people smugglers have, which is to get a foothold in the UK. And that's why the Rwanda model must be reinstated. The Rwanda plan must be resurrected under the next government. I very much hope Labour would do it, but I don't hold out much confidence that they will. They scrapped it on day one of their administration, and they criticised it vociferously when it was in place. So they're no fans of the Rwanda model, but it is absolutely the solution to this problem, because you have a willing partner where people will be treated humanely, they will be accommodated, they will be resettled in a country that wants them. And it also avoids the situation where you've got people coming from countries where it's difficult to return them back to.
Why do you think it's taken so long for your party to come round to your point of view, Suella? There's now a lot of speculation that the Tory leader will announce finally at party conference this autumn that a Conservative government would leave the ECHR. How has it taken so long, and what damage has been done by the delay?
Yeah, I think the delay is a big problem because I think it demonstrates reluctance and a lack of conviction. And that is the concern, I think. It feels as though the Conservative Party has been dragged kicking and screaming to this policy position against its will. And that's what worries me a little bit. The big problem for the Conservative Party, I think, at the moment is credibility. People don't believe us because we made promises for the best part of a decade to cut migration, to stop the boats, and we didn't deliver on those promises, to cut taxes as well. And so saying things is falling on deaf ears amongst the British electorate. They are cynical and they don't believe us. And I think the kind of institutional or political reluctance that the party seems to be demonstrating on this particular policy doesn't really help to resolve this credibility gap at the moment. I think there's also a very strong division of views within the Conservative Party. There are many members of Parliament and many members of the Conservative Party who don't support leaving the European Convention of Human Rights. They believe that the UK should be part of these globalist transnational organisations. They believe it's part of our international reputation. They think that we'd be classed in the same group as Russia and Belarus if we were to withdraw. Totally, nonsensical argument. And they also have a sense of deference to the international legalistic order. And I think that's been shown to be wanting in recent years. We're facing a global migration crisis. Neither the EU, in the form of EU law and the European Court of Justice, nor the European Convention on Human Rights and the Council of Europe and the Strasbourg Court have been able to deal sufficiently to enable democratically elected governments across Europe to curb this global migration crisis. Pretty much every European country is struggling it. When I was Home Secretary, I would meet with other European interior ministers. Without exception, they were all struggling with their number one crisis, which was illegal migration. Germany, France, my counterpart in Italy, Spain, all of them. And we would all share our war stories of dealing with it. And so the transnational European law / international law framework has utterly failed to deal with this global migration crisis. And I think that it's high time that some of us were brave and courageous and said that it's not working, it's outdated. These are structures that were formed in the immediate aftermath of World War II for a very different era, a different time, and for very different reasons. If you look, and my paper sets this out, the origins of the European Convention on Human Rights, and indeed the original script, is nothing that I would object to. It was born out of the tragedy of World War II, with the noble aspirations of wanting to prevent authoritarianism, fascism from taking root again, ever again in the continent. And over time, and the document itself, to which the UK was one of the first signatories, sets out obligations and duties with which I would not disagree. I don't think anybody sensible would disagree. The right to life, the right against torture, the right against inhumane treatment, the right to a private life. All of these are, universal rights. But what's happened is, over the ensuing 40, 50 years, the operation of a politicized and interventionist court, the various doctrines that have been applied by that court, and the very expansive nature of the court's jurisprudence has wholly undermined state sovereignty. And that's why, in a very similar way to the arguments around Brexit, it's just not sustainable, I believe, in terms of wanting to control your borders, control your laws, control your public order, to be part of such an organisation anymore.
You remain a member of the House of Commons, of course, Suella. What would you say to your fellow Tory MPs, the many of them who are really squeamish about leaving the ECHR? To what extent are they behind the curve when it comes to public opinion, when it comes to the shift that we've seen in the much cited Overton window in recent months? Are those colleagues really conservatives?
Listen, I respect people who disagree with me, and reasonable people will disagree on this subject. Learned people will disagree on this subject. Goodness, there are many experts and eminent lawyers who would disagree with me on this subject, and for good reasons. So I do think, however, that times have changed, circumstances have changed, and we are in a crisis. We are facing a systemic and unprecedented crisis in our country when it comes to the unmatched levels of illegal migration. That's posing a national security threat. It's posing a public safety threat. It's fundamentally unfair. And we can't go on like this, where it's a free-for-all on our south coast and anybody can just break into our country in this way. We cannot go on that way. There have been many attempts to reform the ECHR from within. I set those out extensively in my paper. They've all failed. Tony Blair wanted to reform our membership. He failed. David Cameron tried to reform the ECHR from within. He failed. Rishi Sunak went up to Reykjavik, I think in Iceland, and said, I want to reform by working with you, to his Council of Europe members. It failed. So there have been good faith attempts to reform from within. They've all failed over the best part of a decade. It is not consistent with border control. And actually, in many other policy areas, it's causing an insurmountable problem for ministers. Whether it, what public order is another area I focus on, and policing laws. And then lastly, the other big policy area really makes me angry and sad about our membership of the European Convention is the outrageous treatment of our brave veterans who fought in Northern Ireland during the Troubles against the IRA. And many of those British soldiers at the time were following orders, were protecting the realm, Northern Ireland, against known terrorists. And decades later, some of those same soldiers are now elderly men, veterans, who are being persecuted and prosecuted and investigated for murder because of Article 2 of the European Convention on Human Rights. And there has been no end of inquiry and investigation and institutional witch hunt against some of these soldiers. Some of them have been under investigation 5 times. They've been acquitted, and yet they're still being chased through the courts because of Article 2. The European Convention and the European Court of Human Rights has ruled that the families of IRA terrorists have been entitled to compensation. There are some absurdities when it comes to some of these just decisions. And so, the case and the plight of some of our British veterans when it comes to Northern Ireland is, again, a very strong reason why we need to leave.
So you're a Cambridge-educated lawyer, Suella Braverman. I think you passed the New York bar exams as well. You've been Attorney General, you've been Home Secretary. No one could say you lack legal experience and expertise, Suella Braverman, KC, if I may say so. Tell me about Northern Ireland. You just mentioned Northern Ireland there in a different context. We've now had the likes of Jack Straw, who of course was Home Secretary when the precious Good Friday Agreement was signed, saying that leaving the ECHR wouldn't unduly undermine the Good Friday Agreement. We've also had other Labour grandees, former Home Secretaries, not least Blunkett and Charles Clarke, saying we should leave the ECHR. So a two-pronged question, Suella. Why is it that you think the Good Friday Agreement will be okay? Because there's a lot of activist lawyers who are saying it won't be. And aren't the Tories in danger of being left behind? At this rate, Keir Starmer even could declare that the government will leave the ECHR before the Tories say so.
Well, if that does happen, I mean, I will eat my hat, as they say, because
I'll pass
Keir
you the
Starmer,
suit.
Attorney General. Please do. I will. It will be the most astonishing thing if Keir Starmer vows to leave the ECHR, because, of course, he is, he was a human rights lawyer.
Yeah.
His one of his best friends from Chambers is now the Attorney General, Lord Hermer, who again is
Are you a fan?
someone who worships at the altar of rights. How do I put this diplomatically? No, I'm not a fan. I think they're both ruining the country and our international standing.
Do you think a lot of human rights lawyers are just riding a gravy train, just got their hand out? They like all this lawfare stuff. It keeps them in clover.
Listen, I think I was a barrister. I didn't specialize in on the human rights side of things, but I did a lot of work for the Home Office, and I used to defend the Home Secretary in immigration cases in court for a period of several years, actually. And I was up against some of these lefty lawyers very often in court, and I saw that they were just doing their job mainly, but some of them have used the legal system as a campaigning tool as well. I would say. And I mean, immigration law is complex, but it's largely influenced by the convention and human rights, and to a very high degree, the Home Office will lose its cases in court because of human rights. Illegal migrants will be able to claim human rights protections to prevent their deportation effectively, and they can game the system against the Home Office. So, you know, this goes back to over a decade when I was a humble lawyer defending the then Home Secretary, Theresa May, in court, and it was a, you know, there are a lot of very, you know, listen, the English bar, the English legal profession, I think, is one of the best in the world. We produce very high caliber advocates. Courtroom advocacy is the real skill that the English legal system offers the world, and that's
Well,
why
some of them have turned into activists, right?
But what's happened is because of the expansive remit of judicial review in the last 30 or 40 years, it has become a campaigning vehicle. Our courts have become a means of campaigning for left-wing activists. I mean, Lord Sumption talks about this and writes about this eloquently in his Reef lectures, actually 2019. He talks about the empire of law, and he shows quite forensically how law assisted and aided by human rights activists has become hijacked, if you like, by campaigners and political operators